Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Welcome to The Money Factor. I'm Richard Naylor, your host. Most people would agree that insurance is something we need. But how much, and how much should we pay? Our guest today is John Capuano from the New York State Department of Insurance, and you may be, like I, a little surprised at some of the things they do and some of the services that they provide. So let's meet John. John, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
I think to start with, because when I went to your website the first time, I was surprised to find some of the consumer tools that I didn't know were there, and since I'm a librarian, I also feel like I should know that, but probably there are other people who don't know that. Let's just start out by giving a little of the scope. What does your department do?
Well, our department, we're the New York Insurance Department, and our role is to regulate the insurance industry in New York State, and we have many functions. One of them is to inform the public about insurance, and so there's a whole host of information on our website which does just that. But we also do a lot of behind-the-scene things, like we audit insurance companies and we make sure that they have enough money in the bank so that they're able to pay claims when claims come due. So we look at their financial records, we look at their policy forms, we look at rates, so we have many functions.
When I think of insurance, I generally think about myself. What does it cost? That happens every year or two when you look at your auto insurance policy, and you get so many things in the mail about that. And then when I get my policy, I think, oh my gosh, this is complicated. Not just a deductible, although maybe we don't know how big of a deductible is good. And finally, you think about, well, are they going to pay off? How good is this insurance company? Let's go into a little bit of each of those, and then we can drift off and talk about some other tips that people might not know about. So in terms of cost.
Well, the important thing with auto insurance and with all insurance is to shop around and to make sure that you're paying a competitive rate. Many times consumers get locked in with their insurance company for many, many years, and they don't shop around when their policy comes up for renewal.
So you mean locked in psychologically?
Yes, because I think they just get used to paying the premium, and then maybe the premium goes up a little bit every year, and they just accept it and expect to pay that. But we urge consumers to shop around periodically to make sure that they've got the best rate.
Makes sense. But price is more than just how much you... Well, let's back up, though. How can people shop around the best way? Because I noticed there were some things on your website that help.
Well, certainly consumers can utilize our website to get information about insurance, and that can help them prior to going to their insurance agent or to an insurance company so that they may know ahead of time what they're looking for. But then from there, I would say it's important to contact different agents or insurance company representatives and talk to them and just comparison price. And it's very important to make sure that you're comparing the same type of coverages. So if you're getting a quote for a homeowner's policy, for instance, and it has a $500 deductible, make sure when you get the other quote you're comparing the same deductible. Make sure you're comparing the same amount of coverage as well. And so that's very important too.
So you should maybe have a list of things.
Yes, that's very important, is to have a list of what you're looking for, and if you talk to company A, know what their quote entailed, so that when you go to company B, you're comparing the same things.
Well, should you fax somebody your insurance policy, or would that be maybe going too far?
I think usually your best bet is just to contact insurance company agents or representatives, tell them what you're looking for, and if you have a sense ahead of time, that really can help the process to go a lot more smoothly.
Right. And obviously you want the best deal. But then the second thing is, now when you're comparing them, you've got all these options, and maybe one company, is it possible one company could be cheaper if you went this way, but if you reconfigured it in another way, another company might look better?
Absolutely, that's absolutely possible. It's possible that, say for auto, when you're a younger age, one company might have a better rate, but as you get older, another company may have a better rate. So that's why it's important to periodically shop around.
That almost suggests to me then the first thing one needs is not the company, but you need somebody to help you figure out what to buy.
That's right, and that's why we have our website. We have consumer guides on auto insurance and homeowner insurance and health insurance, and those guides are all there to help the consumer understand the coverages that are out there and to help them understand what they're looking for.
We don't really have time to go into every little detail of one policy because we want to kind of cover a variety of things. Maybe you can come back someday.
That'd be great.
But if you looked at what are the major things that people generally really should pay attention to when they're configuring a policy?
Well, I think when it comes, say, to auto insurance, it's important to look at the amount of the deductible, to choose a deductible that you're comfortable with. Deductible, of course, is the amount of money that you would pay out of pocket before the insurance company pays if there's a loss, so that's important. And I think beyond that, it's important just to make sure that you have the proper limits of liability. If you have many assets, then you're obviously going to need higher limits than others. So that would be one thing. I think on the homeowner's side, it's important to understand what type of contents may not be covered for the full amount. So for instance, if you have a lot of jewelry, a standard homeowner policy will only cover jewelry for up to a certain amount of money. And if you have expensive jewelry and you want coverage beyond that amount, then you'd have to purchase a rider which will provide additional coverage. So that's just one example of where it really pays to understand what the limitations on policies are.
Right. Now, I wondered about the deductible. You mentioned that, and it's a thing that's right up front. It makes a significant difference in a policy. It seems to me that insurance is really not so that you never have to pay for anything that happens. It's to protect us from something that we really almost can't afford to pay, or it would make a significant change in our lifestyle if we had to pay. So are we really better off having a very high deductible, or can one not say that?
Well, actually, you're exactly right. That is what insurance is for. It's really to be there to help prevent catastrophic loss. And there will at times be some minor expenses that consumers will have to pay. As far as deductible, it's really a personal decision.
But I almost feel sometimes like with a car. I've never had a serious accident, knock on wood, but I'll just pay it myself. I have a high deductible, and because if I'm going to report something now, it seems like now for 3 years they're looking at me. They're saying, okay, have you been accident-free for 3 to 5 years? We'll give you a discount for that, of course.
That's true, and that's a philosophy that many consumers choose to follow. And certainly with a higher deductible, your premium is lower, so that's another advantage.
So if you took that savings and put it in the bank, to me, chances are you're going to be ahead.
That's right.
Unless you know you're going to have a lot of accidents, and then I guess you really should go to driver's school.
That's right. And I think for some consumers, though, they see maybe a $1,000 deductible, and they think of what they've got in savings, and they don't feel comfortable with such a high limit. So again, it really comes down to a personal decision, but it does make sense.
It should be. $1,000 could be more.
That's right.
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 You can't really talk about the price without talking about the second thing I mentioned, which is all the details. But I want to try to get into the details just a little bit because, for one thing, it's hard to read the policy. I think once we get beyond a few things, we can get our minds around, well, there are all these liability things happening, and people get sued for things that you think, well, they shouldn't be sued for that. Somebody trips, maybe because they weren't watching where they were going, but you've left something on the sidewalk, and so you're responsible as well. And so that's something we can really relate to. But you get beyond that, and you get like 4 or 5 to 9 or 10 or 15 different features, and you might forget something. Can you think of anything, 1 or 2 things that people often don't think about? Flood insurance comes to mind as a possible thing.
That's exactly right. That was what I was just going to mention was flood insurance. Flood insurance is very important for those who may especially be in a location which is susceptible to flooding. Flood damages are not covered by a standard homeowner policy. So a flood policy can be a very important part of a consumer's insurance portfolio. In addition to that, I think that an umbrella policy makes a lot of sense for many consumers. And what an umbrella policy does is it provides higher limits above an auto or a homeowner policy, or I should say above both the auto and the homeowner policy.
So it covers both?
That's exactly
and
right.
It's liability.
That's exactly right, and it's for liability. So if you have a high liability payout, like you mentioned, someone gets hurt on your property, If your homeowners isn't high enough, then your umbrella policy will kick in and will cover the excess over your homeowner policy. So that's a very important product.
Now, these court cases can get completely out of hand. How much should you worry about, well, what if it's that big, or what if it's this big?
Well,
What if it's 5 million and I only have one?
Well, I think the important thing is, of course, to look at your assets. For some people, an umbrella policy may not make sense. And sometimes it comes down to working with your insurance professional, an insurance agent, or an insurance company representative, and asking them for some guidance on some of these questions.
That might be a good place to end exploring this area of detail. There are different types of insurance agents, brokers, people. I think you mentioned somewhere, or I read it on your website, some of the different things. And you probably don't want to recommend anything over another thing, because there are a lot of honest people out there trying to make a living. But how could a person become more educated and maybe get some help in that, about all the possible things that they should consider in their own life based on their conditions?
Well, I think it's important to, again, utilize our website and to research some of the different products that are out there, so that prior to contacting an agent or a broker, you have an idea of what potentially you might be looking for. So really, I think it comes down to making good use of the resources that are available out there on our website or in other places on the internet.
Okay. When I talked about before, I think before we started, I was a little bit tongue-tied and I couldn't figure out how to describe a business person in terms of consumer, but they're also consumers of insurance. It's just that they're not personal.
That's right.
And maybe that's the key word that we came up with. Now, if you're a business person looking for insurance, you have even more potential areas that you might want to consider. Your data, I guess I would. What's going on these days in terms of businesses, and what kind of things are they looking at to add to their insured areas?
That's a very good question. And let me just say at the outset that our website has consumer guides for small business owners. We have one guide for property insurance and another guide for health insurance, and those guides are again, specific to business owners. So those may be good resources for business owners that are wrestling with that question. I think with respect to business, you're right. There are different types of risks that a business owner will need to insure that a consumer won't. One that comes to mind is, what happens if there's a loss to my property, if there's a fire, let's say, and I don't have any income coming in? Then what happens? Your property policy is going to cover your dwelling, it's going to cover your business, but what about the lost income? And there is such a product called business interruption coverage, and that product specifically covers the income you lost because your business was closed down due to a fire or due to anything else that would have been covered, that is covered by the policy.
Right, and I imagine you have to be careful about what really is covered by the policy, and think about that. If you rely, say, on data very strongly and you can't work without your computers.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So that's a very important coverage, and something that I think can really be a great boon to a business owner who's working through a loss. Just knowing that they're going to have some extra income coming in from their insurance policy can be a big help to them. Right.
So there are all of these options these days, and flood and lightning, for example. We had a lightning damage. The library internet was down, and I think it's down right now because of lightning. And what this was called was an act of God. And the insurance people say, but that's not our fault. Oh yeah, you had a service policy, but that's an act of God.
Well, one of the important functions of our department is that if the consumer receives a claim denial from an insurance company, they can come to us and they can file a complaint, and we will review the situation. What we do in that case is we would look at the policy language and try to determine if the insurance company is right in what they're saying. So that's something that consumers can keep in the back of their mind if they ever have a situation like that arise.
Are there ever gray areas where nobody's quite sure?
There are gray areas sometimes. Sometimes the policy language which the insurers present to you isn't always clear-cut. And that's, I think, especially where, coming to our department, we can at times work with the insurer and potentially get a claim covered that was initially denied.
That sounds like a bad thing for the insurance company as well. If you're writing things that are hard to interpret, how does your sales force even know for sure what this covers?
Well, I think insurance companies over the years have done a good job of trying to simplify their policies from their perspective to make clear what is and what isn't covered. But you're always going to have situations arise which don't quite fit exactly according to the policy. And that's where we expect companies to do the right thing and to handle claims fairly.
Well, an important part of what your office does seems to be regulatory and remedial.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we could go back to regulatory in a moment, but in terms of remedial, when do you call? When should someone call you and say, I don't know about this, I was rejected on this claim and I don't know if that should have happened?
Well, if a consumer receives a claim denial, for instance, they are more than welcome to come to us and to bring that to our attention, and we will conduct a complete review of the entire situation. So it doesn't necessarily need to be something where they feel that the company was wrong, because they may not be fully aware of all the laws and the rules that are out there. But if a consumer receives a denial and they wish for us to review it, we'll do that for them free of charge. And what we do in that case is we contact the insurance company, we get their position, and we review everything. We review the law, we review the policy language, and then we write back to the consumer and we let them know what we found.
Great. The other half of that, the regulatory part, I know that you do some kind of insurance and exams. What do you do? Do you certify brokers that they can sell in New York?
That's right. In order to become an agent or a broker in New York State, you have to pass certain requirements. And for instance, for an agent, you would need to pass an exam, and you would have to take a course, I should say, first, and then you'd have to pass an exam to show us that you're capable of being an agent. And at that point, you would get a license, and you'd be certified to do business in New York State. You'd be licensed to do business in New York State.
And that, of course, means that technically they've got the basics, I would assume.
That's right. That's right.
And it doesn't mean that they're superstars and they know everything.
That's right. In fact, the standard for it to be an agent is you have to be competent and you have to be trustworthy. And so those are the two benchmarks that...
How do you test that second part?
Well, we look at their background, and if there's something on their record that warrants further looking into, then we will deal with that individual until we can get to a point where we're comfortable that they are trustworthy. But we look at those two standards, and the exam process, of course, is meant to deal with the competency standards so that we're comfortable that they understand the basics of insurance.
Right. Now, in regulation, though, that sounds confusing to me because we see different rates. So if a company wants to have a rate increase, how does that relate to other companies? Or does it?
Well, one of the important things is that if an insurance company puts in for too high of a rate increase, then they can price themselves out of the marketplace. So companies, I think, do have to be mindful of that. And to some extent, we rely on market forces to keep premiums in check. But for certain rates, we do look at them ahead of time, and it really behooves a company to make sure that their rates are competitive and fair. But it also, remember, is important for the consumer to shop around to make sure that they've got the best rate.
It would seem in this country, with our system, that you would try to do exactly that. You would try to hope that if this company is selling for too high a price, then some other company is going to say, well, I can do that for less, and I'll take that business and I'll still do better. So then the question is, why do you regulate at all?
Well, it's important that insurance rates are fair, that they're equitable, and sometimes companies as a whole may want to raise rates too high. So for certain types of insurance, and our authority in rates varies based upon the law for different types, for certain types of insurance, we will scrutinize rate increases very closely to make sure that as a whole the industry is not getting too out of touch with their claim payouts, so that the rate, again, is fair for the consumer.
Now, there was a recent one, wasn't there, with doctor's liability, and that is going up, what, 14 or 16% or something?
Yeah, and that's something that we've been, was recently approved, and that's been something that our department has made a priority. Superintendent Naylor, who's the head of our agency, has made a priority to take a look at that whole situation. There was a situation where there were many years of very low rate increases, but again, sometimes it can swing in the favor against the insurance company, where they're not getting the rate that they need to keep the product profitable to some degree for them. So sometimes it can be a very fine balance, and it's something that we take very seriously, and we certainly don't approve of anything which we feel would be unfair to the consumer.
Is the market big enough that we don't have to worry much about collusion?
Well, yes, I would say that it is. There are many, many companies that are licensed in New York State, and certainly if that were ever to transpire, our department is there to investigate and to look into those types of abuses.
I was struck by the size differences sometimes of different insurance companies, and you look at the number 1, 2, and 3, maybe down to 8, or maybe even 10 insurance companies. They're pretty big.
Yes, some are very large. Some have been in business for a long time. Others are smaller, and they haven't been in business as long. It's important. Size doesn't matter as much as looking at how does the company treat policyholders? Do they pay claims? What is their experience with our department concerning complaints? And another publication which our department provides to consumers is a complaint ranking, where we actually rank the consumers based on the complaints that we investigate against them. And that gives the consumer the ability to take a look at that list and find out, not if the company's big or small per se, but how do they fare relative to other companies based on the complaints that our department investigates.
And how do you do that? How do you set that table up?
Well, what we do is we only look at complaints that are upheld against the insurance company. So even if many consumers complain, we're only taking the ones where we find the insurance company did something wrong. And then
is this over a lot of different types of policies, or is it narrower focus, like auto versus if somebody sells that in homeowners?
Well, what we do is we provide 2 complaint rankings, one for auto and one for health. And with those rankings, we look at upheld complaints, and then we do an adjustment based on the size of the company, because obviously a larger company is going to generally
If I sell 2 policies, I could have 100% satisfaction.
That's right. So we do adjust it based on the size of the insurance companies, and then we print it and we provide it to the consumer. Or you can go to our website and look at that, and you can consider that as you're making your decision about who you want to give your business to.
Now, I know you're careful about not saying, okay, the first one is necessarily the best, and there are a lot of different factors that go into it, but I think that's a wonderful service that you guys provide.
Yeah, we've been doing this for many, many years, and it definitely garners a lot of attention, and sometimes the newspapers like to pick up on it and get the word out there for us even more, which we're very appreciative of that. So it has been a very important and popular service over the years.
Fraud isn't probably the problem of every individual. It's not my problem exactly that people are falling in front of buses and the bus wasn't even there, or they weren't there. How big of a problem is that in New York in terms of our rates?
Well, fraud definitely makes an impact on insurance premiums. There's no question about that. And our department has taken fighting insurance fraud extremely seriously. In fact, we have a bureau within our department set up specifically for dealing with insurance fraud and investigating insurance fraud. Fraud does make a difference, and that's why we also recommend that consumers call us if they feel or suspect that someone may be committing insurance fraud. They can call our hotline, our fraud hotline, which is 888-FRAUD-NY. And we will listen to what they have to say and potentially investigate.
Well, that's good. I mean, it's probably very difficult to always be on top of every claim, because on the one hand, the company wants to pay a legitimate claim. On the other hand, it doesn't want to pay an illegitimate claim. And it also wants to make money at the same time.
That's right. Sometimes it can be a fine line there, but it's important for insurance companies to look at all claims fairly. And we require that insurance companies report instances of fraud to our department so that we can also become involved in that process. And if a consumer, on the flip side, if a consumer were to have their claim denied erroneously based upon a fraud allegation, again, our complaint process is there for consumers to utilize should that occur.
So that's something to remember, that you guys are there.
Absolutely.
It's worth calling.
Absolutely. And for free, we will investigate any insurance complaint that a consumer brings to our attention.
There are a few little questions that I've always had, and sometimes I don't know if everybody's confused about them, maybe just me, but no-fault insurance, is that only for autos?
That is only for auto insurance, and what no-fault is it provides medical and lost wage reimbursement for people who are injured in a car accident. And what it does is, in New York State, it requires that the vehicle you're traveling in is the vehicle that pays those expenses. And the reason why that's important is because if you were to get into an accident with someone else and there was a question about who was at fault, your medical expenses are not going to be held up while the two sides argue over liability.
I see.
So that's the benefit of no fault, is the car you're in pays for basic medical expenses and lost wages, up to $50,000 for the medical expenses.
Now, that's only the personal injury part. The car itself, it doesn't mean that somebody wasn't at fault.
That's right.
But if I am at fault, my policy would still pay, or the other, my company would have to pay as opposed to the other company.
That's right. Irrespective of who is at fault for the injury, the car that you're in will pay for your basic medical expenses.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to pain and suffering, when it comes to liability, that's different. This is just designed to cover basic medical and lost wage expenses, and it does not cover property damage.
Okay.
So when it comes to property damage, of course, then it does matter who was at fault.
And now you could have these tug of wars between, is that possible, between two companies?
That is.
And it would get held up.
It could, and particularly if the individual whose car is damaged does not have collision insurance. Because if you purchase collision coverage, that's coverage that you as a consumer purchase for your car. So in a situation like that, you could file a claim under your collision coverage and get reimbursement for those damages instead of having to wait for the two, to wrangle it out with the insurance company.
So then that's one of the options that probably would be a good idea.
It's a good idea, although sometimes if you're driving a car that's very old, it may not make sense to carry collision insurance. Certainly for newer cars, it would. It would be a great selection on your insurance policy.
So that's one more of these things that we need to think about when we evaluate our personal situation, which is always going to be different. Children, no children, surviving spouse, well provided already, not provided.
That's right, and that's why it's important to do a periodic review, because your needs may change. That car may no longer warrant having collision coverage, or as you mentioned, for life insurance, you may have had a few children since you purchased your life insurance policy, and now you need to consider, do my life insurance policy amounts need to be higher? Do I need to buy another policy? So it's very important to do that periodic review.
Are there a lot of people out there trying to make sure that we all know about all the options of things that we can buy? I mean, I don't think anybody's ever asked me, do you need flood insurance? But perhaps when we did our house, that happened.
Sometimes it comes down to having an agent or an insurance company representative who's a little more proactive in suggesting these types of coverages. Of course, if you purchase that coverage, that can be they'll get commission on that too. So
you've got to be careful. Yeah.
You definitely do have to be careful. But a lot of times listening to that insurance professional as they present the different options to you is very important, not just to have a predisposition to what you want to do, but to listen to the different options that are out there, and maybe they will suggest something to you which you hadn't considered, which makes sense for you.
So really we are buyer beware no matter what we do, but it seems like you're recommending go to several people and let them analyze the situation.
Yes.
And then we still have to know enough
Yes.
to choose the right one.
Yes, that's right. And I don't want to overwhelm viewers because I know insurance can be so confusing at times to consumers, but it's important to at least understand some of the basics and to have an idea of what your needs are relative to what's available to you in the marketplace.
We're just about out of time, and I feel like we've covered most of the issues. Have you thought of anything that I should have asked? Are there anything, maybe tips for people that we didn't cover?
Well, I think we covered a lot of it. I would just underscore again that it's important to take a look at your insurance policy as well. I talked about doing a review of your needs periodically, but also to take a look at your policy. I'll give you an example. Homeowner policies have limits for certain types of contents. For instance, jewelry is not covered for the maximum amount of coverage under your policy. There's a lower limit for jewelry.
And is that like a number, or is it a percent of the value?
Well, no, it's a number, and it's right in your policy. So just doing a quick review, quick check of your policy will disclose quickly that there are these lower limits called sublimits. And those limits may not be sufficient for a consumer. So they may need to purchase additional jewelry coverage, let's say. So it's important not only to assess your needs periodically, but also to take a look at your policy. And if you have any questions, to ask your insurance company or your insurance agent or broker. So that would be another tip that I could give.
And I don't want to leave without making sure that people can find your website. It's not difficult, but let's let them know exactly what it is.
Okay, it's www.ins.state.ny.us.
Pretty easy. INS is the main part
That's
of it.
right.
Okay.
That's right.
And we'll put it up on the screen so they can see that.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for being with us, John.
Thank you very much for having me.
I've learned some, and I hope everyone else has. And I want to thank everyone who watched today, and hope you enjoyed the show. Invite you to the next one, and wish you a great week. Take care.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.